Alright guys, in this video I'm going to give you the ultimate guide to buying coilovers for your car. I'm going to cover all of the things that you need to look for when selecting a coilover kit depending on your use case. And at the end of the video I'm going to give you my recommendations for both different budgets and for different use cases in terms of which brands and which coilovers to look at for whatever you need them for. And if you're looking to buy coilovers, head over to nefariousracing.com. We've got a massive range on there for coilovers for pretty much every car. Now, here are the things that you need to look at when you're buying coilovers. Now, the very first one, number one, is going to be budget. Because your budget's going to dictate what you can buy, and one of the biggest differences when it comes to coilover models is how much they actually cost. So you need to be aware of what your budget is and what you are going to be able to get for that budget. So let's say, for instance, if you're under $1,000, you're basically going to be looking at a kit that's either going to be very street comfort oriented without a huge amount of features, maybe just adjustable damping. You'll be able to get some with adjustable damping, but it'll only be one way, which is fine for the street. And that's about it. Or you might be able to get some like mono tubes that are okay for performance, but they won't be the best thing for the track. That's about what you're going to get for under $1,000. Anything else is just going to have a bunch of shortcuts and it won't be very good quality. If you're talking to like $1,000 to $2,000 range, then you're going to be looking at more performance oriented kits that are going to be good for occasional track days. If you're getting closer to the 2,000, then you're going to be having some that are, can be used for like regular, maybe like club events, things like that. And above the $2,000 is where you're going to get either the track specific like racing spec coilovers where they're actually made for racing, or some very, very high quality street and track ones like Olin's Road and Track, for example. So you need to know what level of budget you're at and then what you can get for that budget, because don't expect to get a racing three-way adjustable track kit that's going to last you for ages for under $1,000. It's just not going to happen. Now, the second one is the type of height adjustment. So I made a video about the difference between spring perch and shock body height adjustment. I suggest you go watch that video if you haven't already. I'm going to put a link in the description and a link above as well in the card, so you can go check it out. But basically, this is only really going to matter too much if you're intending to lower the car a lot from where it is from factory, and it depends on the kits available. So you have the ones that allow you to adjust by spring perch, which is winding the spring perch down. But the issue with that is as you go down, you reduce the shock travel. And then you have some that are shock body adjustments. You can raise and lower it as much as you want, and it doesn't affect the damper to spring and where they sit together. But again, this is only relevant if you're trying to go really, really low. If you are intending to work within the recommended height of the coilovers that you're buying, then this isn't such a big one, but it's one to be aware of. Now, the third one is the damper type and damping curve. Now, this one is important. So, damper type. So, there are two main types of dampers, and I've made a video about this as well. So I suggest you go watch that. I'll put a link above and in the description below. It's twin tube versus mono tube dampers. So these two are going to make a very big difference in terms of what the coilover kit is actually designed for. So twin tubes are typically cheaper and more comfort oriented, but they're not as good for performance, and I explain why in that other video. And mono tubes are better for performance, but they're slightly more expensive, and they typically sacrifice a little bit of comfort for more response in terms of damping. So you need to decide what your priority is. If you want more comfort, then a twin tube kit like a Tainflex Z, for example, is going to be better, versus if you're more interested in performance, then most of the coilover kits are mono tubes and they will be better for performance. So BC Racing, Fortune Auto, etc., etc. The other thing you need to be aware of is the damping curve of the damper itself. Now, you get linear and you get digressive when it comes to car coilovers. Again, I made a video going over that too. I'll put a link above and in the description below. That's going to dictate how the damper actually responds to bumps and things like that. So you need to know what you're getting. Typically speaking, linear is better for the street and can be used for the track depending on your preferences, and digressive is typically used for the track, more motorsport oriented. Go watch that video if you want to know more about that. If you just need a street kit, basically just get linear, or if you're unsure, just get linear. Now, the fourth one is damper adjustment. So how much adjustment do you actually need your dampers to have? So again, you can have no dampening adjustment, which some of the cheaper street kits have, which basically you just run it at the specs that the company made it at, and that's it. And for people who are unsure, this is typically actually okay, because if you get it from a decent company who's actually put effort into tuning the coilovers for the specific car, then you don't need to worry about anything. You can just run it the way they came and they'll be fine. However, you get adjustments going from one way all the way up to typically three-way, some will do even four-way. And so what that means is you can adjust different aspects of the actual damper itself. So if you get one way, it's going to adjust basically the stiffness of the entire damper. And so you just adjust like whether you want it to be harder or softer. If you get a two-way, you can adjust the compression and rebound independently. So compression is when the damper compresses, and then rebound is how quickly it comes back up. And so if you get a two-way, you can adjust those two independently of each other to really fine-tune the coilovers. If you get a three-way, then you can adjust the low speed and high speed compression. And low and high speed means not of the car, but of how fast the damper piston is moving. And then the rebound. And if you get a four-way adjustable, KW does this and maybe a couple other brands, you can do independently the low and high speed compression and low and high speed rebound. Now again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, then basically you're not going to need any of this stuff. That is only really for if you're fine tuning the coilovers for track, for like actually racing and you're chasing milliseconds on a track, and you really need to make these adjustments to try and get this little bit of performance out of them, then that's what they're for. However, for most people, a one-way adjustable damping is going to be more than enough, especially if it's a primarily street kit with maybe an occasional track day. That's just going to allow you to stiffen and soften the damper and have a little bit of adjustment without overcomplicating things and potentially even screwing them up if you get all the adjustments wrong and you don't know what you're doing. So just keep that in mind, whether you need that and what level of dampening adjustment you actually need. Now the fifth one is top mounts. So the different type of top mounts are actually going to make a big difference in terms of how much comfort and also how much deflection you get in the coilovers. So firstly, with the comfort, if you get a rubber top mount, that's what most factory suspension has. That's going to be the most comfortable, but it's also going to allow the suspension to move as you corner. And this is particularly a problem with McPherson strut suspension, because the top pivot point when you turn the front wheels is at the top, and so under pressure it can actually shift left and right like that and change the entire geometry of your front suspension as you're cornering. So rubber dampers give you a softer ride, so it's better for the street, but they're going to allow the coilovers to move around like that. Whereas if you get pillow ball top mounts, they're basically fully metal on metal, and they don't allow pretty much any movement, but they're also going to be a lot harsher ride because you're going to feel all the little movements through them. And so you need to keep in mind whether you need more performance or whether you're more focused on comfort. And the other thing as well is whether they're camber adjustable or not. So on McPherson strut cars, you can get camber adjustable top mounts on the front, and on some cars on the rear, like Subarus have it on the rear as well. And that allows you to adjust the camber. So some coilover kits allow you to adjust the camber, some don't. Sometimes you can get additional camber adjustable top mounts. So you need to decide whether you need that camber adjustment or not. Typically speaking, if it's only a street car and you're not trying to get like a specific fitment or anything or going super low, you won't need it, but it can be a good feature to have. If you are doing track racing and you actually want to adjust the settings of your suspension, then you will need camber adjustments. So keep that in mind if the car's McPherson strut. The other thing to keep in mind with this is some companies have actually done like a camber adjustable rear rubber combination. For example, RSR have a camber adjustable rubber top mount combination where they've used a rubber mount but with a camber adjustment. That's pretty rare, but some companies do that to try and give you both comfort and performance. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, number 6 is spring rates. So basically, spring rates is how stiff is the spring. So if you want more performance with less movement and the coilovers are going to be, harder to compress and stay more stable, you want a higher spring rate, but obviously that's going to come at a cost of comfort where it's going to be very stiff on the street, especially where it's bouncy and you're going to feel it. versus softer spring rates, which are going to be softer, but obviously they're going to allow more body roll, more movement, etc. Now, typically speaking, you don't really want to mess with the spring rates that they give you because the damper is set up to match the spring rates of the springs. And so if you put much stiffer or much softer springs on most coilovers, the damper won't be able to do its job properly, and it's going to either blow the damper or the ride's going to suck. And so what you need to do is make sure that you're matching the spring rates to the damper. Now, some companies will actually change the damper settings to match the spring rates for you. BC Racing claim to do this. Fortune Auto, all these other ones, Feel, some other ones that do like a lot of customizations, they will actually match the damper to the spring rate, so you can select one. However, you need to be very careful that you actually know what you are doing when you're selecting spring rates, because the factory setup has been set up as usually the best all-rounder, and if you don't know what you're doing, you probably should not mess with the spring rates. You should probably just take the factory one or the one that the company has set up for you, or speak to the company, tell them what you're trying to achieve, and get them to recommend you what they're doing, because you can easily select the wrong spring rate, get the coilover, the dampers damped incorrectly, or to match, but it's either too stiff or too soft for your liking or what you're using them for, and then you've just paid now thousands of dollars for a coilover kit that's useless. So be very careful when you're selecting spring rates and what you're doing there. In most cases, you should probably just leave it with the setup that they from the company as they have it. Now, number 7, and I'm gonna have to put it over here, we're running out of room, is divorced versus true rear. So divorced versus true rear is meaning whether the spring and shock is separate to each other or whether it's one piece like a regular coilover, like this picture. This is only on some cars that came out of the factory with a separate rear spring and shock. So for example, a lot of BMW 3 Series, Nissan 350Zs have this, and 370Zs and the G35, G37s. There's a couple other cars, I can't think off the top of my head, but there's a few other models. Those two are basic, or those few are basically the most popular. And what this means is whether the rear is a divorced spring and damper separate, or whether it's a true rear like this. Now, honestly, this is not actually going to matter that much, and you're going to get a very incremental difference by going from divorced versus true rear. However, a lot of the time to fit a true rear on a car that came with a separate spring and shock is going to be a lot of work, or you're going to have some issues, like for example, you have to strengthen the strut towers so that the shock and spring doesn't come shooting through the top mount, etc. So usually the effort to make a true rear is not worth it for 99% of people. Unless you're building a track specific race car and you need like those milliseconds to get out of the suspension, then a true rear may well be useful, but otherwise divorced rear is usually more than good enough. The only other time I can think of that you might need a true rear is if you're going super low. In some cases, divorced rear, you can have some clearance issues sometimes, depending on the model of the car. But again, you'd have to be basically scraping the frame rails for that to happen. So it's usually not worth going for a true rear unless you have a specific reason why you need it. So just get the divorced rear, and it's going to save you a lot of headache. So those are the main things to keep in mind in terms of features of coilovers. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the best ones that I think features for the specific use cases, so for street and for track, and then I'm going to give you the brands that I recommend you go for at the different price points and what features they have. So let me clear all this. All right. Right, so first off, we'll do street setup. So street, and I'm going to put comfort here because I'm going to assume that this is going to be someone who's daily driving their car and or just driving it on the street, whatever, weekends, doesn't matter, and they want mostly comfort. Maybe they'll do a track day, maybe they won't, it doesn't really matter. So basically for this setup, what you typically want to go for is rubber top mounts, which usually won't have camber adjustment, but that's up to you whether you need the camber adjustment. You probably won't for this setup, unless you have some very specific use case, or you're stunting your car or something like that. You'll want to typically go for twin tube dampers with linear valving, which most of them will be. Now you can get monotube dampers with linear valving as well. Monotube will be okay. So with this one, I wouldn't base my entire purchase decision off whether it's a twin tube or a monotube, but I would keep it in mind. If you really want to go super comfort, then get a twin tube. Whereas if you're okay with a little bit of stiffness, which I mean you're buying coilovers, you probably should be, just get the monotube that's softer and is linear damped, and you're going to be fine as well. But typically I'm just giving you the most optimal scenario. Now the next thing you want is softer spring rates. So you want to look for a kit that has softer spring rates. You can compare kits against each other. Now, and also just keep in mind that that also depends on how the dampers are damped as well. But typically speaking, if they've got a softer spring rate, they'll probably be softer for the street, slightly more comfortable. You'll also want just one-way dampening adjustment, or none, but I would go one-way damping adjustment. So this is the setup that I would look for if I was buying a street kit for my car. So rubber top mounts, twin tube dampers in linear or mono tubes, softer spring rates, one-way dampening adjustment. So most street kits are designed with this sort of setup in mind. So for instance, Tame Flex Z's are basically this with twin tube dampers. BC Racing BR series are this, but with mono tube dampers, although I think they can come with pillow ball, so you need to just check what your specific application, but it depends on your use case and how picky you are with that. I'm trying to think what else. I think Reaction have a similar one like this. There's a couple others that have like this sort of setup, and that's usually what you're going to find for most street kits. If you see these specs, it's usually a street kit. Now the next one is going to be for track. So I'm going to rub this off and do it again. So track use. Now this is going to depend on what level you're obviously racing or using them on the track. There's a very big difference between someone who's just running club events and like occasional track days versus competing. However, this is the basic specs that you should be looking for a track kit. So firstly, you want pillow ball top mounts. Now the next thing you want is monotube dampers, definitely for track. Now, whether you get linear or digressive is going to be up to your personal preference and what you want. There are some people that race on linear, some people that race on digressive. Typically speaking, most people use digressives for motorsport specific applications. However, there are definitely some people that prefer linear. So that is going to be up to you now to decide. If you're unsure and you're getting your first sort of track spec kit, just get linear and then you won't have an issue. But if the kit only comes digressive, like let's say for instance Fortune Auto 500s, don't worry too much about it. It'll be fine. It'll help you with the handling anyway. So I wouldn't stress too much if you're not sure. Now the next thing is 2- or 3-way dampening adjustment. So basically, the higher up you're going in competitiveness, the more adjustment you're going to want. One-way adjustment will be okay as well if you're kind of new to this and maybe this is your first like track specific coilover kit. It'll give you enough to soften or stiffen them without getting too complicated. If you want to get more into it, then you can certainly get a 2-way or a 3-way, and it's going to give you more to work with in terms of the settings and getting the actual exact settings right for whatever the purpose of the motorsport you're doing, whether it's drifting, whether it's track, whatever. It will give you more options to play with, basically. Now, the next thing is, and this is not mandatory, but it's a good one, external reservoirs. Typically, these come with a 2- or 3-way dampening adjustable kit. Not always, but a lot of the time. And what that does is it has more damper oil in it, and it also moves a lot of the damper oil away from the heat source. And so that allows the coilovers to actually perform longer under extreme driving conditions. So let's say you're racing, it's getting hot, things like that. There's a lot of movement. External dampers will just keep the oil a bit cooler, give you more oil, and usually give you a second piston so that you can do a 2- or 3-way dampening adjustment. Again, not all 2 or 3 ways have it, but a lot of them do. And this is not exactly mandatory, but as you go up in competitiveness and you're trying to really get your setup right, you're probably going to want that. And then the last thing is going to be inverted dampers for a McPherson strut car. So that's only applicable for McPherson strut cars. The ones with double A arms won't have this because the shocks are far away from the brakes anyway. But basically the idea with the inverted dampers is that the actual damper section where all the oil and everything is actually at the top up here. And so what happens there is, one, it takes the damper oil and gas away from the heat source, which is typically the brakes, which can get very hot with racing. And so it puts them up here so that the dampers last a little bit longer without getting as hot, and they can cool down easier. And then the second thing is it moves a lot of the weight up to the actual body of the car, so it's not unsprung weight. So it's typically easier to manage when it's sprung weight versus unsprung weight if it's mounted down the bottom. So a lot of race kits for McPherson cars use this because it helps. Now, if you have a double A-arm, let's say rear, what's going to happen is you'll have a inverted front and a normal rear. And if it's just a double A-arm car, like let's say a Nissan 300ZX or something like that, which is probably about half the cars in the market at least, you're going to have just normal ones. They won't give you this option because they're further inboard anyway, not that close to the brake, so you don't really have to worry about that. But basically, this is what a track-specific kit will look like. You'll also want, I'm just going to put here actually stiffer spring rates. I should have included that. Basically, you want stiffer springs because what that's going to do is it will keep it more stable, like it will have less body roll during corners, etc., etc. This obviously depends on the specific racing you're doing. Sometimes that's not the case. Some cars need stiffer front, less rear, etc., etc. So it's going to depend on the application. However, typically speaking, you will have stiffer springs no matter what motorsport you're doing than a track kit. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And you want to make sure that the actual dampers are valved to match and be able to handle the stiffer springs that you are going to be using. So that's what a track-specific coilover kit will look like, typically speaking. So you want to look for these features if you are buying coilovers for the track. Now I'm going to go into what brands you should look at and for different price points. So first off, we'll go with sub $1,000 because that's probably where most people are going to be when it comes to coilovers. It's just what it is. So for these, my definite recommended kit is the Tane Flick Z. So at this price point, you're basically going to be buying a street kit, hoping that it can handle some track use. Most of these claim they can, which is fine. The Tane Flick Z is a twin tube damper. It's more for comfort, but they have tuned the dampers to be able to handle some track driving. They have a special oil in them that lasts longer, etc. So they can handle a bit of track. But these are basically the best low price coilover kit I can find under $1,000. They're really, really good. They're made in Japan. They're made to a high standard. They've got shock body height adjustment, all the stuff you want, one-way dampening adjustment, all the stuff for less than $1,000. It's actually pretty fucking impressive. So Tane Flick Z's, I'll definitely look at them. However, they're primarily only made for Japanese cars. So if they don't make a kit for your car, I'll look at Reaction. Reaction have also sub $1,000 kits that can actually be rebuilt and upgraded as well. And they're also very impressive. So I'll take a look at Reactions. They, at the sub 1,000 point, I believe they have linear monotubes with one-way adjustable. They might have a digressive option as well. If you're doing more track stuff or you want digressive specifically, they might actually have the kit for you. But basically for the sub $1,000 kits, these two are definitely my favorite. There are a couple others that seem to be okay based on other people's experiences. For example, Megane Racing and Godspeed, they are okay, but they're very budget kits and you can't expect that much out of them. People do use them for like track and stuff, but again, you know, they're very cheap kits and you just need to know what you're getting. However, if you're getting a really, really cheap kit, I'd basically be looking at Megane Racing or Godspeed if for some reason you don't want to get one of these two, but I don't see why you wouldn't. I would just go with Reaction if you're going to get a sub $1,000 kit. If you want a monotube or if the Tane Flick Z is not available for your car. So now the next one will be 1,000 to 1,500. That's basically like this is budget and then this is like entry level, if you get what I'm saying. So for the entry levels, definitely takes the cake BC Racing. These guys are very, very popular, have been around for ages and have now basically been proven. A lot of people shit on BC Racing still for some reason. However, they have definitely proven to be a decent coilover kit for this price. I mean, they're slightly less than $1,200 typically, and it's like you're not going to get much better for $1,200, seriously. So they're a one-way adjustable monotube. They come with rubber mounts mostly at the BR series, which is what you're going to be getting here. BC Racing also make higher level kits, two-way, three-way adjustable, etc., more for racing. But I'm talking specifically in this range. This would be the BR series. And they're basically made as a street coilover kit, which is still comfortable. They have monotubes with linear valving, and they can handle some track use. So that's the idea. Occasional track day, but mainly for street. The BC Racing BR series, definitely what I'd recommend. Otherwise, I would go with Silvers. These guys are not as popular as BC Racing, and quite frankly, I'm not sure why. They're slightly more expensive. It might just be their marketing or they haven't invested that much in it, but they are very similar to the BC Racings, except that they can actually be upgraded to two-way as well. So the silvers are slightly more expensive and they allow you to actually upgrade. Otherwise, they're monotube. I can't remember if they're linear or digressive at this point, the base model ones, but basically they're also a good kit as well. So if you want to get if you want to spend a little bit more money and have the option to upgrade to two-way later, then the silvers are actually really good. And another one I would recommend, this, which just scrapes in at like 1,500 something, might be like a little bit over, is Feel. Feel are actually really good. They do a lot of customization. They can help you set up the exact spec for your car, and they make kits specific for drag racing, drifting, circuit, street, whatever it is. So if you can go closer to the $1,500 range, I would definitely recommend checking out Feel. They're actually very good. I really like what those guys do. They make a good product, and they actually put a lot of effort to making sure you get the right kit to suit whatever your use case is. So definitely check them out if you have closer to $1,500 to spend. If you've got only $1,000 or so to spend, get the BC Racing BR series. They're really good. They can be rebuilt, etc., etc. So definitely do that. Now I'm going to go over $1,500. And the reason I'm going over 1,500 is because from here, the lines start to get a bit blurred, and it can go anywhere up to $5,000 or more for like a really specific track kit like Moton or something. I think some go for like 8, but the features and how good they are, etc., you start getting diminishing returns at some point. So basically over 1,500, my number one choice is Fortune Auto. These guys are very impressive. They're kind of like Feel, and I believe Feel as well, but Fortune Autos are made in the USA. Like, they assemble them in the USA. I don't know where the parts come from. They're probably not USA made dampers, etc., but it doesn't really matter. What Fortune do is they dyno tune every damper that comes in and then only match them if they're within a 5% tolerance. So the two sides are within a 5% tolerance. If not, they throw them out. Most companies, especially on the cheaper end, don't do that, but they do. And Fortune also offer a 5-year warranty, which is basically the longest I've ever seen for like aftermarket coilovers. I've never seen, or I can't think off the top of my head, another 5-year warranty. So that's really impressive. They're made specifically more for track. So they're digressive valved, and the 500s offer one-way dampening adjustment, which is actually only on the rebound side. And then they've got 510s, two ways, etc., which are, go up as you want more features and more track specific settings. But definitely check out Fortune Auto if you have slightly more than $1,500 to spend. They're usually around $1,800 for the 500 series. And if you want a more track-oriented kit, that's definitely the way to go if you have the money. They're very high quality. The next ones I'd recommend is Stance USA. So not Stance Plus. That's a different brand. That's not what I'm talking about here. These guys are called Stance USA. I'm going to put links to all of these in the description as well. So if you want to go check them all out, links will be in the description to each of these brands. Stance USA, funny enough, despite the name, you would think there'd be like a show coilover, but they're actually a very good track coilover. I'm not sure why they went with this name, but they actually make really good kits with inverted dampers. They're digressive valve. They're literally made for like time attack and circuit racing, and they're actually very good. So they're another one I would definitely consider. I think they might actually be slightly less than the Fortune Autos. I'm not 100% sure, but they're definitely another good option. Olin's is another good option. You'll basically get the road and track kit. I can't remember off the top of my head how much it costs. It's probably over $2,000. They're very high quality road kit that will handle track use as well. They're one-way adjustable mono tube with shock body height adjustment, etc., etc. Definitely check out Olin's if you have the money to spend. They're very expensive, but they're basically the best that you're going to get. And one more I want to recommend in this price range is the Tane Monosports. So Tane, I know I recommended them up here for the Flex E. That's their cheap twin tubes. They have another one called the Tane Monosport. And these are more along the lines of like the BC Racing BR series, but they're made by Tane. They typically go for anywhere from $1,500 to $2,000 depending on the car. But they're also extremely high quality, more track focused kits that I would recommend because Tane makes some really good coilovers. These are made in Japan and they're very high quality. So I'll definitely recommend checking out Tane Monosports in this price range as well. They're very good. Now, I'm going to make one final note because I know a lot of people are going to ask me, which is KW. So what about KW? Now, KW would fit in the over 1,500 range, typically speaking, and I do think they make decent suspension. However, I believe they're very, very high priced for what they are personally. So typically most KWs are twin tube, which is fine. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But they also do spring perch height adjustment. They don't do shock body height adjustment. Their lowering range is very limited. So unless you're going to be in that range, they're not really going to be much use to you. And if you compare them to the comparative other coilovers that have similar sort of features, they're usually twice the price. And so I'm just not sure whether the value for money is there personally on a KW kit when you have so many other options that are actually very good and allow a lot of customization. KW basically just make the kit for the car. And to give them credit, they do tune every coilover for every car, and they're also very, very corrosion resistant. So if you live in a place like Europe or somewhere in America where there's like very harsh winters, they're very good and they're known for that. But I just think they're overpriced, and basically they're done at the way of, you get what you get, and from here it's kind of your problem, like take it or leave it. And I don't really like that personally. I like to have the options, and so why a lot of these allow you to customize a lot of stuff, whereas KW doesn't. The one thing that KW do from memory, now I might be wrong on this, but I believe they offer a lifetime warranty, which is actually very impressive, if that's still the case. I think that was the case. I can't remember if it still is. But if they do, then that's very impressive. But just be aware that the KW for the equivalent other coilover is basically going to be twice the price. So you will get a decent kit, but I just don't know if it's worth twice the price. That's why I'm sort of on the fence about whether I want to recommend them, but that's what I think about it. So that's basically it, guys. That's what you can expect. This is how you can choose coilovers for your car, what you need to look for, and what coilover kits you should look at for the different price points and for whatever you're using them for. If you are looking to buy coilovers, like I said, I'm going to put links to all these in the description below. We have coilovers on nefariousracing.com, most of these brands, and if not, I will direct you to the ones we don't stock to another place you can get them for the best price as well. So go check those out. Otherwise, if you have any questions, post them in the comments below and I will answer them. Otherwise, if you need help selecting coilovers for your car still, just shoot us an email through the website on nefariousracing.com and we'll help you out. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll catch you on the next one.